All right, what's herd immunity? So, what happens when 30% of the population has been infected and recovers? What happens when is it potentially a scenario where 60% of all Americans within the next 6 to um, 18 months get the infection? And again, covering this again, 80% of those who get infected will have a mild course of disease. 10% will have moderate to kind of very bad flu, and then about 10 to 12% will need hospitalization. Of the 10% that get hospitalized, uh, you know 6.5% will go to the ICU, and about 1.5 to 2.5% will die. So let's talk about the 80% that 80 and 90%, up to 95, I should say, that are survivors over the course of 6 to 18 months. What does that look like? Well, um, we are beginning to have treatment modalities that work. So I think that 6 months from now, getting COVID will be a very different scenario than it is today. I mentioned that this last week that weeks from now, maybe four weeks from now, the mortality rate from this is going to drop because we've learned to treat it very differently than we did when we began. So we will start to see a lot more people with herd immunity, right? Contributing to herd immunity. Now, this is what is not herd immunity. All right, this is allowing the virus to circulate among a general healthy population, and then isolating, your elderly and your immune compromised or whoever outside of that population. That does nothing to either protect them long term or generate herd immunity. All you're doing is creating the opportunity for these people in the middle to have to come in contact with those people who cannot live in isolation, for months and months at a time, with never coming across anyone else from society. You're just isolating them like that is just a recipe for not good performance overall when it comes to the key performance indicators of this disease. So the ideal scenario is what's next. All right, so here is 80% immunity. There are 10 people on that screen. 8 of them have either recovered from the disease or been vaccinated. Either way, they will not get sick. If they don't get sick, then they don't transmit the virus to each other, right? And therefore, they won't transmit the virus to those that are most susceptible. This is herd immunity, and this is only achieved with time, patience, vaccination, track and trace, and unfortunately, with a good deal of the population suffering with, the mild to moderate course of the disease. There's got to be someone with herd immunity questions, so I'll pause here. All right, so I'll just cover the last couple of points here. You've been hearing a lot of R naught in the. Can everybody hear me? Okay. I don't know if I've lost people or.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Cool. So a lot of you have heard about what is R naught as a performance indicator in epidemiology. R naught is the transmissibility of an infectious agent. On the very high end is something like measles, where the R naught is between 12 and 18. So one person can readily infect 12 to 18 other people. That's how highly transmissible and contagious it is. On the lower end, obviously, is something like on the low end is SARS, to be quite honest, or the common cold, or something that doesn't have that has a hard route of infection, that is an infectious agent that's kind of fragile outside of the host. So R naught or transmissibility is something that occurs naturally. We're seeing that the R naught of COVID-19 is between 2 and 3. And so that means that, over a course of 6 weeks, there is exponential growth. And the doubling rate is extremely difficult to manage. Higher the R naught, the more transmissible, the shorter the doubling time, et cetera. Now, RE is what we use as R effective instead of R naught. It's what happens when we implement non-pharmaceutical interventions. And non-pharmaceutical interventions are physical distancing, usage of masks, insistence on hand washing, reduction in crowding, insisting that we don't hold large community events like sporting events and things like that. These things are short term. Depends on your tolerance for the definition of short term being months. And eventually what we are able to do is bring that R naught down to less than 1. That means that one person will eventually infect less than one other person at scale. So, and the reason we do that is because we keep people away from each other for a long enough time that the latency and the incubation period, the reservoir of infection out in the community is reduced significantly, and therefore the risk level is reduced. Okay, now questions.
Yeah, I have a question, Sanjay.
Yes.
Say, as an example, if you lived in a backward state like Texas,
Okay.
I picked that one for no specific reason.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And they're rushing to open up everything,
Yeah.
and they've already said that there's no consequence for violating any of the protective orders. Once they're open up, does that change the R naught number, or is that set in stone? I mean, once you get
it changes the
more
R
people out.
So it changes not the R naught, because the R naught is innate to the infectious agent. Okay. So we're still dealing with the same infectious agent, and I'll get to why it changes a little bit over time. But R naught stays pretty static. And when I say measles is 12 to 18, there's some strains of measles that were extremely aggressive and extremely virulent and extremely transmissible. And then on the low end of 12, 12 is still ridiculously high, right? So when I say R naught of 2 to 3, that means one person can infect 2 people, or they could have a strain that's aggressive enough to infect 3 people, right? So that will stay pretty static. We're not going to wake up one day and the R naught has jumped to 6. That's very, 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 unknown, unseen. So I would say not impossible, but so rare that we haven't encountered an infectious agent like that. What does change immediately is R effective. So if you remove these non-pharmaceutical interventions, then you have an immediate effect on the transmissibility. Let's call it transmissibility quotient of the virus. Then you have the reservoirs refilling, right? You start to refill the reservoir with infectious agent because you have people back out into the community doing and whatever they want, especially if they're not obeying mask wearing, especially if they're not, using the red, yellow, green to, assess and deal with risk. If they just feel like, they're as safe out in public as they are at home, like we used to feel, then your R effective goes back up.
Yeah, I never understood how, Texas is going out whole hog. They're saying they're at 25%, and that's a wink. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's sort of like everything open up, and we're going to pretend we're at 25%. And already our numbers are going up.
Now, when you say you're at 25%, what is that? 25% what?
They say they're opening businesses up to 25%, and then they're going to stage it to 50%, and then they're going to stage it. And I've heard people saying that they've gone by restaurants where the patios were full. No one
Right.
had a mask
I've heard
on,
the
and
same. I've heard this
yeah.
in Florida. Yeah.
So that's why I wondered if that affected the R not at all, especially, you have such a huge base now to work off of.
Yeah. Now let's say you've got it below 2, right? Let's say you've got enough people separated apart for enough amount of time that reservoir has reduced, the risk level in the community has reduced. You immediately open stuff up, even at 25%, your R effective is going to go back up. And then what happened in Georgia was they said, oh, we're going to open up May 1st or May 8th or whatever. And tons of people from the neighboring states came to Georgia, 62,000, because they wanted, they just needed to get to a bar or they needed to get to a restaurant. And so they drove. And when you have 62,000 people from outside of Georgia entering whatever different communities where they're doing business now and are open, come on, immediately that you've done all this work for 6 weeks to bring the R naught down from 3 or 2 to less than 2, and you're trying to get it to below 1, but with 62,000 people rushing in to take advantage of reopening, that's going to shoot right back up to between 2 and 3.
Well,
You just lost all of that work.
Well, everything that all these states that are reopening, and the playbook was supposed to be based on increased testing, and that's gone. That was a pipe dream. That was just a thing they threw out there as an excuse to start opening stuff up. There is not the level of testing being done. Like, give you an example, like Texas, where they already announced that they were shutting down some of the federally funded sites for testing, and they're going to leave it on the counties because the state won't pick that up, but the counties now have to scramble and try and find some way to continue testing people.
Yeah, exactly. So later on, we'll be talking about why testing is important, and then Sanjay's 5-point strategy to get back America the way we had it, because it's a combination of all these things that you just mentioned. But if we all work together, we can suppress the R effective to a point where R effective will be different. It will be much higher. It will continue to be high in urban areas, but in Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, where we live in a suburban area that borders rural, that R effective could be really low. But it takes the community to deal with this, and like I just gave you the Georgia example. Okay, you can
Right.
open up 25% of the businesses, but if all 25% of the businesses operate at capacity, you know what I mean? Do you see what I mean, Terry?
Yeah, it flushes the
progress down the
yeah, everything is out the. I feel like down here, Texas, everything is out the window now. It's the rush is to see how fast you can get open. And since no one there's no oversight to it, the 25% was a joke. No one opened up to just 25%. So it makes you think that on top of that, any social distancing, any of that is right out the window.
Yeah.